My name is Margaret Ellison. The day my husband asked me to give up a part of my body for his lover was the day I realized that the people closest to you can become the ones who cut the deepest. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started on a Thursday morning, the kind of day where the air felt still, almost heavy, like it was waiting for something bad to happen. I was making coffee in the kitchen, my robe tied loosely bare feet on the cool tile. The sun had just begun to spill across the counter when my husband Paul walked in. He didn't greet me. He didn't even pour himself coffee. Instead, he stood there, arms crossed, and said, "Maggie, I need to talk to you about something serious. It's about Linda." Linda. The name alone made my stomach tighten. She wasn't a friend, not even an acquaintance I could pretend to like. She was my husband's lover, a much younger woman whose presence had been hanging over our marriage like a dark cloud for the past year. I'd never met her in person, but her existence had seeped into every crevice of our life. Paul's voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "She's very sick. Kidney failure. The doctors say she'll need a transplant soon. And, well, you're a match." For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it. "You could save her life," he said, stepping closer. "It's just one kidney. You're healthy, strong. And it would mean the world to her. To me." The world tilted slightly beneath my feet. I stared at him, searching for any trace of irony, any sign that this was some twisted joke. There was none. His eyes were cold, determined. "Paul," I said slowly, "you're asking me, your wife, to give an organ to your mistress." "She's not just my mistress," he replied, as if that somehow softened the blow. "She's a good person. She doesn't deserve to die. And I do." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. He sighed, exasperated, as though I was being unreasonable. "Don't be dramatic, Maggie. You'll live a perfectly normal life with one kidney. People do it all the time." My hands tightened around my coffee mug. I could feel my pulse thudding in my neck. "And why me? Doesn't she have family, friends, you?" "She's not compatible with anyone else," he said flatly. "But you're O negative. You're a perfect match. It's fate, Maggie. Fate." As if the universe had intended for me to be the savior of the woman who had been stealing my husband's time, attention, and intimacy. I turned away from him, busying myself with the coffee pot just to keep from looking at his face. The aroma of the coffee was suddenly bitter, suffocating. "No," I said finally, "I'm not doing it." Silence. I could feel him staring at me, the tension between us sharp enough to cut. Then he muttered, "You'll change your mind. You have to." And he walked out of the kitchen without another word. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if there had been any moment in our marriage where I could have predicted this. This level of audacity, this utter disregard for me as a human being. By evening, I had decided to call my son Daniel. Surely he would be appalled. Surely he would stand by me. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. "Your father wants me to donate a kidney to his lover," I said. "Can you believe that?" There was a pause on the line, and then Daniel's voice came quieter than I expected. "I know, Mom," he told me. My heart sank. And, maybe you should think about it," he said. "She's dying. If you could save her, why wouldn't you?" I felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. "Because she's your father's mistress, Daniel. Because it's wrong. Because it's my body and I don't owe her anything." He sighed, the same exasperated tone his father had used. "You've always been the one who puts other people first. You're better than this. Prove it." The words hit me harder than I expected. My own son, the boy I had raised, fed, clothed, and loved, was asking me to mutilate myself for the sake of the woman who had helped destroy our family. I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the glow of the street lamp casting shadows on the walls. My coffee had long gone cold on the table beside me. I thought about the years I had spent building this family, the long nights working double shifts as a nurse to pay for Daniel's college, the times I'd put Paul's needs above my own dreams, the countless sacrifices I had made without complaint. And now those same people were standing together asking me to give them yet another piece of myself. Only this time I knew one thing for certain. If they thought I would do it, they didn't know me at all. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Daniel's voice repeating those words. You're better than this. Prove it. As if my humanity, my worth as a mother was suddenly being measured by whether I'd bleed for a woman who had stolen my husband. By morning, the dull ache in my chest had turned into a sharp, pulsing anger. I told myself I needed to see Daniel in person. Maybe then he'd understand. A phone call could be brushed off. Eye contact couldn't. I drove to his apartment, the same one I'd helped him put the down payment on 2 years ago. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with bare winter trees that rattled softly in the cold wind. When he opened the door, he looked surprised, maybe even a little guilty. "Mom," he said, stepping aside. "I didn't expect you." I walked in without answering. The place smelled faintly of coffee and aftershave. I sat on his couch, clutching my purse in my lap, and fixed him with a look that must have told him I wasn't here for small talk. "Daniel." I began, my voice steady but low. "I need to hear you say it again. You think I should donate my kidney to your father's mistress?" He sat across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I think. She's dying, Mom. I think if you can help, you should. What happened between you and Dad is separate from this." I almost laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Separate. You want me to pretend she hasn't been sleeping with my husband for over a year. You want me to pretend she's some stranger who wandered into my life in need of charity." "It's not about pretending," he said, his tone bordering on frustrated. "It's about compassion. About doing the right thing." "And what exactly is your definition of the right thing?" "Daniel," I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "Because from where I'm sitting, the right thing would be you telling your father to stop humiliating your mother." He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "Dad's not perfect, but he's trying to make things right for someone else. And you've always told me that saving a life is worth any personal discomfort." That cut deep. Yes, I had told him that years ago when he was a boy, and I wanted him to grow up with empathy to see the value in helping others. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't a stranger in need. This was the woman who had been grinning behind my back while dismantling my family. "I can't believe you're on his side," I said finally. He hesitated, then delivered the blow that nearly took the air from my lungs. "I'm not on his side, Mom. I'm on the side that saves someone when they can." There it was. The line that told me he'd already decided who I was in this story. The selfish one, the stubborn one, the obstacle to someone else's happy ending. I stood up, clutching my purse a little too tightly. "You have no idea what you're asking me to do," I told him. "And one day you'll realize it. But by then, it'll be too late to take back the things you've said." I left before he could answer. The drive home felt longer than usual. The streets seemed emptier, the cold sharper. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I could see Paul's car already parked in the garage. I didn't want to face him, not yet, but I had no choice. He was in the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter with a glass of water. "I talked to Daniel," he said, his voice almost smug. "Of course you did," I replied, setting my purse down. "He understands," Paul went on. "He's not letting the past cloud his judgment. He knows this is about saving a life." I turned to him, my patience already worn thin. "Don't twist this into some noble cause. This isn't about saving a life. This is about saving her, the woman you chose over your wife. And you want me to help you do it." Paul's jaw tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Maggie. We could get through this with some dignity if you'd just. Dignity, I cut in my voice sharp. Don't you dare talk to me about dignity when you've spent a year parading around with a woman half your age, and now have the audacity to ask me for a piece of my body to keep her alive. His eyes darkened. You're being selfish. That word selfish hit like a slap. All my life I'd been the one who gave. The one who worked extra shifts, who cooked and cleaned, who kept the family together when Paul's business was failing, who loaned money to Daniel without a second thought. And now, standing in my own kitchen, I was being told I was selfish because I wouldn't be complicit in their betrayal. You know what's selfish, Paul? I said quietly, leaning forward so he couldn't look away. Cheating on your wife, and then expecting her to save your mistress. That's selfish. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he set his glass down with a sharp clink and walked away, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't catch. That night, I locked my bedroom door, something I hadn't done in years. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my hands. They looked the same as they always had, strong, capable, the hands of a nurse who had held countless lives in them. But now they felt foreign, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. The truth was sinking in heavy and unshakable. This wasn't just about a kidney. This was about control. They wanted to break me, to strip away the last pieces of independence I had left. And I knew deep down that if I gave in now, there would be nothing left of me to save. The next few days felt like living inside a slow-moving storm. Nothing exploded outright. No screaming matches. No dishes thrown. But the tension seeped into every corner of the house, thick and suffocating. It was the kind of quiet where you know something is happening beneath the surface, where every closed door feels like it's hiding whispers you're not meant to hear. I started noticing small changes. My coffee mug wasn't where I left it in the cupboard. The laundry I had folded disappeared from my room, only to reappear days later, wrinkled. Meals I made were left untouched, as if my cooking had suddenly become inedible. One evening, I came into the living room to find Paul and Daniel sitting together, their voices low, faces drawn in concentration. The moment I entered, they stopped talking. The air between them was thick with whatever they weren't saying. "Don't stop on my account," I said, my voice even. Daniel shifted in his seat. "It's nothing, Mom. Just talking about some things." I looked at Paul. His jaw tightened, but he didn't meet my eyes. "Private things," he added, his tone clipped. That was when I realized they had formed a united front, not father and son in the usual sense, but co-conspirators. And I was the enemy. The real blow came 2 days later. I walked into the kitchen to find an envelope on the counter. My name was scrawled on the front in Daniel's handwriting. I opened it to find a brochure for a private transplant clinic along with a note. "Mom, I know this is hard for you, but please read this. You'll see it's safe, and you'll be helping someone who really needs it. Daniel." I dropped the papers on the counter as if they were contaminated. Safe. Nothing about this felt safe. Not the procedure, not the way they were closing in on me, and certainly not the thought of lying on an operating table for the sake of a woman who had done nothing but take from me. That night at dinner, I pushed my plate away. "I'm not reading it," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. Daniel sighed, already exasperated. "You're being stubborn." Paul didn't look up from his plate. "She's been stubborn her whole life. This is just who she is." The casual cruelty of that remark hit me like a slap. They didn't see me as a person anymore, just an obstacle, something to be pushed aside until I broke. It was around this time that the isolation started to take shape in more obvious ways. Friends I had spoken to weekly suddenly stopped calling. Texts went unanswered. One neighbor who had always been warm to me crossed the street when she saw me coming. At first I thought I was imagining it. But when I finally reached out to one of my closest friends, Ellen, she was distant. Her voice on the phone was polite, but it carried an unfamiliar stiffness. "I heard you're going through a lot right now," she said cautiously. "Paul mentioned you've been difficult about something important. My stomach turned. Difficult. That's not my word, she said quickly. I'm just concerned. People are saying you're refusing to help someone in desperate need. The realization hit me like ice water. Paul was already shaping the narrative. He was telling people I was heartless, selfish, maybe even unstable. By the time I hung up with Ellen, I knew this was no longer just about me and my family. They were preparing the ground so that if I refused, I'd be the villain in everyone's eyes. One night, I heard voices drifting up from the kitchen. I paused halfway down the stairs, careful not to make them creak. She's getting more resistant, Paul was saying, his tone low but tight. I don't think she'll agree unless we push harder. She'll cave, Daniel replied. She always does. We just have to make her see how bad she'll look if she doesn't. She's already making herself look bad, Paul said. People think she's cruel. That's the only way to get her to bend, make her believe she has no choice. My hands gripped the banister so hard my knuckles ached. Every word confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't persuasion anymore. This was a campaign, an organized effort to break me down until I said yes. I crept back to my room before they could hear me. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, my heart pounding. I had never felt so cornered in my own home. The next morning, I decided I needed to be careful. Fighting them openly would only give them more ammunition. If they wanted me to play the role of the stubborn, cold-hearted woman, I'd give them nothing to work with. I smiled when they spoke to me. I kept my answers short. I cooked meals without asking if they wanted them. I didn't bring up the kidney, not once, but inside my mind was moving like clockwork. I knew enough from my years as a nurse to understand that no doctor could operate without my written consent. I also knew that coercion could be just as illegal as physical force if I could prove it. The trick was surviving long enough to gather that proof. I began keeping a small notebook tucked away in my dresser where I recorded every comment, every conversation, every time they tried to corner me. I noted dates, times, exact words. It was tedious, but it gave me a strange sense of control. They thought they were wearing me down. In reality, they were giving me the rope I needed, not to hang myself but to tie a noose around the lies they were weaving. I wasn't ready to strike yet, but I knew the moment would come. And when it did, I'd make sure they never saw it coming. It happened late on a Sunday night, the kind of night when the house feels hollow, its walls carrying every sound just a little too clearly. I had gone to bed early, hoping to escape the suffocating tension for a few hours of dreamless quiet. But sleep never came. Around midnight, I padded down the hallway toward the kitchen for a glass of water. The murmur of voices stopped me in my tracks. They were coming from Paul's study, the one room I had learned not to enter without knocking. I was about to turn back when I heard a laugh. Not Paul's, a woman's. It was smooth, practiced, like she'd mastered the art of making a man feel important. I froze. It's not just about the transplant, the woman was saying. Her voice carried a subtle edge beneath the sweetness. Once I have that, everything changes. He'll have no reason to hold back. Paul's reply came low, almost a whisper. She meant him. You don't understand? She continued. If your wife saves my life, she's tied to me forever. She'll have to accept me. And if she walks away, it's easier for you and Daniel to move on. She'll be the one who left. There was a pause, the sound of a lighter flicking. Paul didn't smoke. She did. You've been patient, Paul said finally. But Maggie's stubborn. We might need to nudge her more. I'm not worried, the woman replied. She's a nurse. They can't help themselves. They need to feel like heroes. Once the doctors start talking to her, she'll fold. Trust me, I've done this before. That last sentence chilled me. I've done this before. I backed away slowly, each step measured so the floorboards wouldn't betray me. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door softly and leaned against it, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house. I sat on my bed, replaying the conversation in my mind. It wasn't just about the kidney. This woman wanted leverage, a permanent claim on my life and my family's future. And she was confident enough to say she'd manipulated someone like this before. The next morning, I couldn't even look at Paul without hearing her voice in my head. Over breakfast, he watched me closely as if measuring my mood. I kept my expression neutral, stirring my oatmeal long after it had gone cold. "You didn't sleep well?" he said, his tone deliberately casual. I glanced at him. "And you know that." How he shrugged. "I can tell." I wanted to say, "Of course you can. You were up late scheming with her," but I bit my tongue. I wasn't ready to let him know what I'd heard. Not yet. That afternoon, I dug deeper into my own quiet investigation. I called in a favor from a former colleague, Janet, who still worked at the hospital. I didn't mention names, only that I needed to know how the donor matching process worked for a specific clinic. Janet hesitated but finally said, "They can test compatibility without telling the donor exactly what it's for, but they can't move forward without explicit consent. If anyone tries to coerce you, Maggie, that's a legal case." I thanked her, my mind already spinning. That meant if they were planning to nudge me through the medical staff, I could use that to my advantage, but I'd need evidence of the coercion. The following night, I made sure to be in the living room when Paul came home. He was carrying a brown paper bag from the takeout place we used to love. He set it on the counter and said, "Thought we could have dinner together. Just us." My first instinct was suspicion, but I forced a smile. "Sure." Halfway through the meal, he leaned back and said, "Linda's numbers are getting worse. She doesn't have much time. If you did this now, it could mean everything." I set my fork down slowly. "You mean everything to you?" He didn't flinch. "To all of us." That was when it clicked. He wasn't trying to appeal to my love for him anymore. He was trying to make it seem like refusing would hurt Daniel too. That was the real weapon, guilt wrapped in family loyalty. But thanks to what I had overheard, I now knew it wasn't about life-saving urgency. It was about securing her place, cementing her hold. Later that night, I made my first real move. I dug out an old digital voice recorder from a box in the garage one I used back when I was taking advanced nursing courses. I tested it, slipped in fresh batteries, and placed it in my dresser drawer ready to use the next time I caught them talking. They wanted to nudge me. Fine. I'd let them think I was on the edge of giving in. And when they leaned in too close, I'd have the proof I needed to pull the ground out from under both of them. The storm in this house wasn't going to break over me. When it broke, it would be over them. It happened on a cold Tuesday morning, the kind where the air bites at your cheeks and makes you pull your coat tighter around you. I was sipping coffee in the kitchen when Paul walked in, unusually upbeat. "I made you a doctor's appointment," he said almost casually, like he was announcing the weather. I frowned. "For what?" "Just a routine checkup." "You haven't had a full exam in years." I figured it's about time. The lie was so clean, so effortless that for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But I'd worked too many years in healthcare to know that he had never once cared about my preventative checkups before. Still, I knew better than to challenge him outright. "Fine," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "When?" "Today, 11 o'clock. The clinic wasn't one I recognized, a small private facility tucked between a law office and a pharmacy downtown. Inside, everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender air freshener. The receptionist greeted me warmly, too warmly, and handed me a clipboard of forms to fill out. As I skimmed through the questions, my stomach tightened. "Do you have a history of kidney disease? Have you ever experienced urinary tract infections? Family history of organ failure?" These weren't general wellness forms. They were pre-screening questions for potential organ donors. I set the clipboard down, forcing my face to remain calm even as my pulse spiked. "These seem specific," I said to the receptionist. She smiled politely. "Standard questions." "Dr. Avery just likes to be thorough." I'd never heard of Dr. Avery. but I knew that name would stick in my mind. They called me in after a short wait. The exam room was bright and cold, its walls plastered with framed certificates and medical diagrams. A tall man in his late 50s walked in wearing a white coat and a pleasant smile. "Margaret," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "Paul tells me you've been so generous to consider helping someone in need. That's rare these days." I froze mid-shake. There it was. The confirmation. This wasn't a checkup. This was an evaluation, and Paul had clearly told him I was already on board. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, pulling my hand back. But Dr. Avery was already flipping through a chart. "We'll just do some basic blood work today. Nothing invasive. You're a perfect match. The preliminary test shows." "Wait," I cut in sharply. "Preliminary test? I haven't had any tests." He glanced up, momentarily flustered. Well, your husband mentioned a recent lab panel from your last physical. It was easy to cross-reference." So Paul had handed over my medical records without asking me. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to keep my voice level. "I'm not consenting to any further testing," I said. "And I'm certainly not agreeing to any procedure." Dr. Avery gave a small, patient smile, the kind doctors reserve for patients they think are being irrational. Sometimes people just need time to adjust to the idea. "But organ donation?" I said. "No." I interrupted sharper this time. The silence stretched between us until he finally closed the chart. "Of course. We'll hold off then." When I walked out into the waiting room, Paul was there, leaning casually against the wall. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" I didn't answer until we were outside, away from the receptionist's cheerful eyes. "You lied to me," I said, my voice like ice. He shrugged. "You'd have made excuses if I told you the truth." "That's because I've already told you my answer," I snapped. We walked to the car in silence. But as soon as we were inside, he turned to me, his voice low and dangerous. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Maggie. Do you really want to be the reason someone dies?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Do you really want to be the husband who tries to bully his wife into saving his mistress?" For a moment we just stared at each other. Then he started the car without another word. Back at home, I went straight to my bedroom and pulled out the small recorder from my dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling with adrenaline, and recorded every detail of what had just happened. The forms, Dr. Avery's words, the way Paul had admitted to lying. It wasn't enough yet, but it was something. A thread I could pull later when the time was right. What Paul didn't realize was that the more he pushed, the more determined I became to push back. He thought cornering me would make me fold. But what he was really doing was building the case that would destroy him. After the unsettling experience at the clinic, I thought maybe the worst was behind me, that the veil of lies and pressure might lift a little. But the strangest, most heartbreaking blow was yet to come. It wasn't from my husband or my son. It was from the people I thought I could trust. For years, I'd leaned on my circle of friends, women I'd known since my nursing days, neighbors who shared recipes and stories, childhood friends who knew my past and my dreams. They'd been my sanctuary when home felt unbearable. But as the days turned into weeks, a slow and silent rift began to grow. The first sign was a missed call from Ellen, the friend who had once seemed so distant. She hadn't answered my texts for days, and when she finally did call, her voice was polite but distant, like someone who was carefully choosing her words. "Maggie, I've been worried about you," she said cautiously. "You've been saying some things about Paul and Daniel that don't quite add up. People talk, you know." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "People have been lying, Ellen. About me. About everything." There was a pause. "I hope you can find a way to get past this for your family's sake," she said softly before hanging up. The next morning, I learned she'd told others I was unstable, that I was making baseless accusations, that I was perhaps letting bitterness cloud my judgment. When I reached out to other friends, I found the same story echoed. Invitations to coffee dates quietly stopped coming. The warm smiles in passing turned to polite nods at best or outright avoidance. I was becoming a ghost in my own life. One afternoon, I summoned the courage to visit Martha, another close friend who lived a few blocks away. Her door was answered by her husband, who seemed surprised and a bit uneasy to see me. "Maggie," he said, "I don't think Martha's feeling well enough to have visitors." I left a pang of sadness twisting inside me. The network I once depended on was unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. That night, I sat alone in my darkened living room, feeling more isolated than ever. I realized my husband had not only been poisoning my marriage, but had also been carefully poisoning the minds of those around me. The lies weren't just about a kidney donation, they were about erasing me from existence. But if they thought this would break me, they were gravely mistaken. I began to journal everything, every call unanswered, every friend who turned away. I knew I had to hold on to reality no matter how distorted the world around me became. Slowly, I found strength in solitude. In the silence, I could hear my own voice again, the voice that refused to be silenced. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance. The loneliness was suffocating, but I had something no one else could take away: my resolve. During this time, memories from my past resurfaced, reminding me of who I was before the betrayals, before the lies. I remembered the long nights working shifts at the hospital, comforting patients and families in their darkest hours. I remembered the sacrifices I made so my son could have a better future, working multiple jobs, living frugally, always putting their needs above my own. And yet, despite all I had given, they treated me like a burden. But these memories didn't bring despair. They ignited a fire. I refused to be the woman who was forgotten. One afternoon, I reached out to Janet, my nursing colleague. I shared what was happening: the isolation, the manipulation, the pressure. She listened with empathy and advised me to document everything meticulously, to protect myself legally if needed. With renewed purpose, I organized my notes, recorded conversations, and even began discreetly recording encounters where Paul and Daniel applied pressure. In the midst of this turmoil, a small flicker of hope appeared. Janet introduced me to a support group for people facing coercion and abuse, a place where my voice was not just heard, but valued. Through their stories and shared strength, I found the courage to stand taller. Back home, the tension escalated. Paul's impatience grew more apparent. Daniel's pleas became more desperate. But I was no longer alone. I was preparing my quiet counterattack. As the days stretched on, the battle lines in my home became more defined. The once familiar rooms now felt like a battlefield, where every word, every gesture was a test of wills. One evening, as Paul and Daniel strategized in hushed tones over dinner, I sat quietly, listening. They spoke of deadlines, of forcing my hand before the lover's condition worsened, of the family's image, but all I heard was fear masked as control. That night, I recorded their conversation, every word etched in my mind. The audio would become my shield and sword when the time was right. Though the walls closed in, I felt a strange clarity. Their unity against me only made me more determined. I was no longer the victim. I was the storm gathering strength, and I would not be silenced. There's a certain quiet pain that comes from realizing the sacrifices you once made are now invisible, as if they never existed at all. That pain settled in deeply during those long, lonely nights when the house felt like a cage, and the faces I'd trusted turned away. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where the afternoon sun used to warm my shoulders, and I let my mind drift back over the years before everything fell apart. I remembered the time I gave up my nursing career to care for Paul when he was battling a severe illness. The doctors had said it was a difficult recovery, and no one believed he'd pull through. But I was there night and day, waking up at all hours to check his temperature, to soothe his restless sleep. I made sure he ate, that he took his medication, that he didn't give up on himself. Those months were some of the hardest of my life yet. I never complained. Because love isn't measured by comfort, it's measured by the willingness to endure hardship for someone else. Then came the years when Daniel was a boy, bright and restless, full of dreams I wanted to nurture. I worked double shifts at the hospital, barely sleeping, just so I could pay for his tuition, his music lessons, the little extras that made childhood magical. I never told him how tired I was. I never let him see the nights I cried alone, wondering if I was doing enough. I sacrificed promotions, nights out with friends, even simple pleasures like a quiet cup of tea, all for them, for my family. And now they looked at me as though I was a stranger, a roadblock, a woman whose love and sacrifices had somehow turned into liabilities. I remembered the day Paul told me he'd been unfaithful, how I had shattered my world, crashing around me in a million pieces. But even then, I had clung to the hope that we could heal, that our family could survive. Because that's what I was, a woman who believed in second chances even when the evidence told her otherwise. But belief only goes so far when betrayal is so deep. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was the cold demand that I donate a kidney to the woman who had taken everything from me. The silent isolation, the disappearing friends, the emotional manipulation from the people I loved most. I wondered often in the dark if they even remembered the woman I once was. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the window pane, I took out my old photo albums. The yellowed pages held pictures of birthdays, holidays, graduations, moments frozen in time when laughter filled these walls. I traced my fingers over a picture of Daniel as a toddler sitting on my lap with a gummy smile. In another, Paul and I stood arm in arm, younger, hopeful, before the cracks had begun to show. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away stubbornly. I couldn't let myself drown in sorrow. There was still fight left in me. I made a promise to myself that day. I would not be erased. Drawing on the strength from those memories, I began to change my approach. No longer would I simply resist. I would prepare. With careful precision, I started gathering evidence of their manipulations. I copied medical documents, recorded their conversations when they thought I wasn't listening, and kept a detailed diary of every incident. My nursing background became my secret weapon. I knew the laws around organ donation, the ethical boundaries doctors couldn't cross, and the protections afforded to someone coerced into medical procedures. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed allies. One morning, I reached out to Janet again. We met for coffee in a quiet cafe, the kind with soft jazz playing and thick curtains that kept the noise of the world outside. Janet listened intently as I laid out the situation. She didn't flinch at the betrayal or the pressure I was under. Instead, she offered practical advice and a lifeline. "Margaret," she said gently, "you're not just fighting for your kidney, you're fighting for your dignity. And that makes you stronger than they realize." Her words lit a spark inside me. With Janet's help, I connected with a lawyer who specialized in medical consent and family coercion cases. We discussed the possibility of filing a restraining order or seeking legal protection should things escalate. Every meeting, every phone call felt like taking back a little piece of myself. But despite the growing tension at home, I kept up appearances. I smiled when I had to say the right things and played the part of the compliant wife, all while building the case that would one day expose the truth. Back at home, the atmosphere was suffocating. Paul and Daniel's collusion grew more brazen. They used guilt like a weapon, reminding me of the pain refusing would cause them, twisting my love for my family into chains. But inside, I was no longer the frightened woman who had first heard the demand. I was a storm-gathering strength, a woman who knew her worth. And I was ready. After rekindling my resolve and gathering allies, I realized that fighting blind was no longer an option. The veil had to be lifted, the truth uncovered. I needed to see the whole picture, the real story behind the woman my husband called Linda, the mistress whose desperation was driving my family to the brink of collapse. The first step was subtle observation. Every glance exchanged between Paul and Daniel in hushed tones, every suspicious phone call at odd hours, every vague mention of finances, it all mattered. I became an investigator in my own home, taking mental notes, piecing together fragments that would otherwise go unnoticed. One afternoon, while Paul was out running errands, I found myself alone in the living room when Daniel's phone buzzed. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen and froze. The caller ID read Linda. Before I could stop myself, a message preview popped up. The settlement papers need to be signed ASAP. Don't let your mother stall. We're running out of time. My heart raced. Settlement papers. What kind of settlement could be so urgent that it required pressing Daniel to force my compliance? Determined to find out, I began discreetly searching through Paul's study while he was at work. The risk was high, one wrong move, and they'd know I was digging, but I was past caring about comfort or safety. This was about survival. Inside a locked drawer I hadn't noticed before, I found a thick envelope filled with documents, property deeds, financial statements, and legal contracts, all signed by Paul and, surprisingly, by Daniel. Most were related to transferring assets to Linda's name, a vacation home, a luxury car, even shares in the company Paul had founded decades ago. It was a calculated takeover cloaked in the guise of love and illness. I sat back, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me. They weren't just trying to force me into donating a kidney. They were orchestrating a complete erasure of my place in this family, financially and emotionally. That night, I confronted Daniel armed with the evidence. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I laid the papers out on the kitchen table and watched him carefully. "Do you know what this means?" I asked quietly. He looked away, conflicted. "Mom, it's complicated. It's betrayal," I said simply. "You and your father are signing away the life I helped build. And all for her." Daniel's defenses crumbled. I didn't know the whole story. That moment cracked the armor he'd worn. It was the first time I saw hesitation, doubt flicker in his eyes. From that night, things shifted. I had exposed their plan, and now I was no longer alone. I had stirred the conscience of the one person who might still choose family over deception. But the battle was far from over. I doubled down on my efforts, contacting trusted friends and legal advisors. I prepared to fight not just for my kidney, but for my dignity, my home, and my rightful place. This was no longer a quiet surrender. It was a war I was determined to win. After revealing the financial documents to Daniel, I sensed a crack in the facade he and my husband had built. But I knew better than to trust that cracks alone would bring them down. I needed a confidant, someone who could guide me through the maze of medical ethics and legal protections and help me prepare for the battles ahead. That confidant came in the form of Helen, a former nursing colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. Helen was a seasoned nurse practitioner, sharp, compassionate, and well-versed in hospital procedures and patient rights. I reached out cautiously, explaining my situation without revealing too much. To my relief, she didn't hesitate. We met in a small cafe, the kind with soft lighting and quiet corners perfect for confidential conversations. As I recounted my ordeal, Helen listened intently, nodding with understanding. "Margaret," she said, her voice calm but firm, "what you're facing isn't just emotional blackmail, it's coercion, and that has serious legal implications. No one can force you to donate an organ, no matter the family ties." Her words gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in months. But what if they try to manipulate the doctors or use medical staff to pressure me? Helen sighed. "That's where your documentation and evidence come in. Hospitals have strict protocols around informed consent. If you can prove any attempt at coercion, it can halt the process immediately. You also have the right to request counseling and independent medical advice." She explained how donor evaluations worked, what questions they'd ask, and the importance of understanding every detail before consenting to anything. "I'll help you," she said. "And I know a few people in hospital administration who can keep an eye on things. You won't be alone." That support was like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. For the first time, I felt a plan taking shape, a path forward. Over the next few weeks, Helen became my trusted ally. We discussed strategies, rehearsed how to respond to invasive questions, and built a network of support that stretched beyond my home. Meanwhile, Daniel's attitude continued to shift. He began questioning Paul's motives, more openly expressing doubts and guilt. I seized every opportunity to reinforce our fragile reconciliation, knowing that rebuilding trust would be slow but essential. At home, Paul's frustration grew. His cold glances and terse remarks were constant reminders of the war waging beneath the surface. But Helen's guidance and Daniel's wavering allegiance gave me strength to hold my ground. I was no longer the isolated woman they tried to break. I was fighting back with knowledge, support, and the quiet power of truth. The pressure from Paul and Daniel wasn't just increasing, it was becoming suffocating, like the air itself had thickened in our home, leaving me gasping for breath. What had once been subtle suggestions and polite requests had morphed into relentless emotional warfare. They were no longer asking, they were demanding, and their words were edged with threats masked as concern. That evening, after a day filled with strained silence, I was sitting in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading. The words blurred on the page as my mind spun with the growing tension in the house. Suddenly, Daniel came in quietly and sat beside me on the worn sofa. His presence felt deliberate, calculated. The easy warmth I once associated with my son had been replaced by something different, a mask of calm that barely hid the turmoil underneath. "Mom," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "We need to talk." I closed my book and looked at him, bracing myself. "All right. What is it?" He swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair nervously. This isn't just about Linda anymore. It's about us. About the family. You refusing. It's putting everything at risk." I met his gaze steadily. "Everything. Or just what Paul and you want to protect." He flinched at the edge in my tone but pressed on. "If you don't help, you risk losing more than just a kidney, Mom. You risk your relationship with me, with Dad. You risk tearing the family apart." His words hit me like a punch. The son I had raised with unconditional love was now holding my heart hostage, threatening to sever ties if I didn't comply. The very people I had given my life for were wielding guilt as a weapon, threatening exile for standing firm. "I won't be the villain in your story," I said softly but firmly. "I'm not willing to sacrifice myself for a family that's already broken." His eyes betrayed the conflict within him. "I don't want to lose you, Mom, but I also want to save her. We're stuck." Before I could respond, Paul appeared in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold and unreadable. He stepped forward and sat opposite us. "Maggie," he said, voice steady but edged with impatience. "I don't want to push you, but you have to understand how serious this is." I looked at him, measuring every word. "And I need you to understand how serious this demand is for me. Asking me to give a part of myself to the woman who's been tearing our family apart. That's not a request, Paul. It's a violation." He sighed deeply and rubbed his forehead. "I know it's hard, but sometimes love means putting others before yourself. That's what family is. Not when it means destroying yourself," I shot back. Paul leaned in, his voice dropping. "Do you want to lose us? Because that's the path you're on if you refuse." Daniel nodded in agreement, his eyes glistening with the pain he was trying to hide. "We need you, Mom. This isn't just about Linda. It's about us, about the family." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I love you both. But love isn't supposed to be a weapon." The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The man who was supposed to protect me and the boy I'd raised were now standing united, using guilt and fear to bend my will. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. That night, lying awake in the dark, I felt the full weight of their words crushing me. But buried beneath the despair was a stubborn ember of resistance. If they thought this would break me, they were wrong. The days that followed were a relentless assault on my peace. Text messages flooded my phone, Daniel's pleas for understanding, Paul's veiled threats disguised as concern. Think of the family. Do the right thing. We can't do this without you. At home, every glance between them was a reminder that I was the lone obstacle in their path. I began to notice the coldness creeping into everyday interactions, dinner conversations filled with silence, small but pointed comments that made me question my place. Yet I remained composed, outwardly calm, even as my heart pounded with anxiety. I had learned the hard way that emotional outbursts only gave them ammunition. With Helen and my legal advocate's support, I fortified myself with knowledge. I understood now the rights I had, the protections the law offered against coercion. I knew that consent must be freely given, not wrung out through manipulation or fear. Every call with Helen was a lifeline, every legal consultation a brick in the fortress I was building around myself. One afternoon, Daniel came to me, his face etched with conflict. "Mom, I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "I don't want to be the reason we lose you, but I also don't want to lose Dad or Linda. I'm torn." I reached out, taking his hands in mine. "You're not responsible for their choices, Daniel. You're responsible for yours. And you need to listen to your heart." Tears welled in his eyes. "I want to believe in us again, but I don't know how." I squeezed his hands gently. "Start by telling the truth. Start by standing up for what's right." It was the first honest conversation we'd shared in months. A fragile bridge was forming. Paul's confidence began to waver as Daniel's loyalties shifted. I sensed the tension during family dinners, Paul's sharp glances replaced by uncertainty, Daniel's hesitations growing louder. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak. But I was a woman forged in fire, a nurse who had saved lives, a mother who had fought for her family every day. And now, I was ready to fight back. The emotional blackmail was a battlefield, but I refused to be a casualty. With each passing day, I gathered evidence, strengthened alliances, and reclaimed pieces of myself they had tried to take away. This war was far from over. But I was no longer alone in it. The pressure from Paul and Daniel was relentless, but I knew sheer resistance wasn't enough. To survive and ultimately win this battle, I needed more than just willpower. I needed proof, strategy, and leverage. I had to use everything I knew from my years as a nurse to protect myself against the manipulation and coercion tearing my life apart. I began by gathering all the evidence I could. My small voice recorder, tucked discreetly in my dresser drawer for months, became my most trusted tool. Each conversation they thought was private, each attempt to guilt or intimidate me was carefully documented. I recorded their whispered conversations about getting me to comply about the family's future and their plans to nudge me medically. The weight of those words, now captured in cold, undeniable audio, gave me a strange sense of power. Every text message, every email, every veiled threat was copied, saved, and cataloged in a detailed log. I kept the dates, times, and circumstances meticulously recorded, building an unassailable timeline of the coercion. I even took notes about my own emotional and physical state, on days when their pressure was overwhelming, knowing that psychological duress would be crucial evidence if this escalated legally. Parallel to collecting evidence, I reached out quietly to trusted colleagues from my nursing days. I had avoided mentioning specifics, but the situation was urgent. Janet, a longtime friend and fellow nurse, gave me invaluable advice. She walked me through the ethical and legal frameworks hospitals follow concerning organ donation. She reminded me that true consent must be freely given; any hint of coercion voided it. Doctors and medical staff are bound by strict laws to ensure patients are never forced into donating organs against their will. Janet also told me about the psychological evaluations donors undergo, an often overlooked safeguard. If I reported feeling pressured or manipulated, medical professionals were required to intervene and halt the process. That knowledge became my armor. One of the most chilling realizations was how easily Paul had obtained my private medical records without my knowledge or consent. Sharing those records with doctors and transplant clinics under false pretenses was a gross violation of patient confidentiality and privacy laws. That alone was a serious legal breach I intended to expose. With Janet's guidance, I studied the typical donor evaluation process, the series of blood tests, cross-matching physical exams, and psychological assessments. I prepared myself mentally for these rehearsing clear, firm responses to any attempt to rush or pressure me. I knew that maintaining calm and asserting my rights in those appointments could be the difference between autonomy and forced submission. While I fortified my defenses, I also reached out to Daniel privately. I shared what I'd learned about my legal rights, the medical protocols protecting me, and the importance of genuine consent. For the first time in months, I saw hesitation and regret flicker in his eyes. He admitted quietly, "Mom, I didn't realize the extent of their plan. I want to make this right." That small admission kindled hope that the son I raised might still be reached. At home, the atmosphere became increasingly tense and volatile. Paul's impatience was obvious. His once casual tone was replaced by sharp remarks and cold stares. He frequently questioned my decisions, implying that I was being unreasonable and selfish. Daniel vacillated between pleading with me and emotionally withdrawing, creating an exhausting dynamic. But I stood my ground. One evening after dinner, I asked Paul to sit with me alone. I looked him in the eyes and calmly set boundaries he could not ignore. I told him I was fully aware of my legal protections and that any attempt to coerce me medically or otherwise would have serious consequences. I spoke not with anger, but with unwavering resolve. He stared at me, shock and frustration battling across his face. "You think you can fight this? I know I can," I replied. That night, I updated Helen, my nursing confidant, and my lawyer. Together, we prepared for every possibility attempts to circumvent my consent, medical overreach, and psychological pressure. We crafted plans to ensure my voice could not be silenced. I also reached out to a local advocacy group that supports victims of coercion and medical abuse. Their guidance bolstered my confidence, expanding my network beyond the confines of family betrayal. The emotional blackmail continued, but it no longer shook me. Each attempt to guilt or intimidate was met with quiet strength and the knowledge that I was not alone. I carefully logged every message, every veiled threat. Friends who had distanced themselves earlier began returning. They were drawn by the strength I was projecting, a beacon of hope for anyone trapped in similar battles. I reminded myself daily that this struggle was about far more than a kidney. It was about reclaiming my body, my rights, and my dignity. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior. The day I decided to confront Daniel was one of the most difficult days of my life. It wasn't just about revealing truths. It was about risking the fragile threads of a relationship already stretched thin by betrayal, lies, and manipulation. But I could no longer stand silent while my family was torn apart by secrets and selfishness. I arranged to meet him at a quiet cafe downtown, away from the suffocating walls of our home, where every word seemed to echo with tension and suspicion. The little place had a comforting familiarity, the aroma of fresh coffee beans, the soft murmur of other patrons, and the warm glow of soft lighting that softened even the hardest moments. As he walked through the door, my heart clenched at the sight of him, the same boy I had raised with love and sacrifice, now a man whose loyalties were tangled in a web I could barely untangle. He spotted me and approached, hesitation in his steps. His eyes searched mine as if looking for a sign of forgiveness or condemnation. I offered a small, steady smile. "Thank you for meeting me, Daniel." He nodded, sitting down across from me, folding his hands tightly on the table. "What's going on, Mom?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the carefully organized folder I'd prepared. Inside were the documents, recordings, and notes that laid bare the full extent of the scheme his father and he had been involved in: the transfers of property, the secret financial arrangements, the manipulations behind closed doors. I opened the folder and slid it toward him. "Look at this, Daniel. It's everything I've uncovered, the truth." He hesitated but slowly began flipping through the pages. I watched as confusion clouded his face, giving way to shock, then guilt. These These are all signed by you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "And this," he pointed to the voice recording transcript, "is you, Mom, listening to them plan behind my back." I nodded. "Yes, I didn't want to believe it either. But it's all real. Your father and you have been working to strip me of everything: my home, my dignity, my health, all for the sake of a woman who isn't even part of this family." He looked away, fighting the emotions twisting inside him. I thought. I thought I was doing the right thing. I reached across the table and gently touched his arm. "You were misled, Daniel. They used you. But now that you see the full picture, I need to know, where do you stand?" Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. "I'm so torn, Mom. I love you both. But I never wanted to hurt you. I thought following Dad was protecting the family." I squeezed his arm. "Family means more than blind loyalty. It means honesty, respect, and protecting one another. It's not about sacrificing one person to save another." He swallowed hard, voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by telling the truth," I said firmly. "By standing with me instead of against me. We can rebuild what's been broken, but only if you choose to be honest." The tension in the cafe seemed to lift a little as he nodded. "I want to be on your side, Mom. I'm scared." "I'm scared too," I admitted softly. "But we're stronger when we face things together." The days that followed were delicate, filled with cautious conversations and tentative steps toward rebuilding trust. Daniel began to question Paul more openly, asking difficult questions about Linda and their intentions. He grew quieter during family dinners, no longer parroting Paul's demands, but wrestling internally with the divide that had fractured us. At home, Paul's facade of control began to crack. The alliance he once counted on was eroding before his eyes. He sensed Daniel's growing distance and responded with cold suspicion and veiled threats. The household simmered with unspoken tension. But I felt something shift within myself too. With my son's awakening and my strengthened resolve, I no longer felt isolated. I was reclaiming my voice piece by piece. With Daniel's support, I was able to communicate openly with Helen and my lawyer, preparing for the battles that lay ahead. Together, we strategized ways to legally protect my rights and challenge any further attempts at coercion. One afternoon, as I sat with Daniel in the garden away from the shadows of the house, I took his hands in mine. "You're not alone in this," I told him. "We're a family that's been tested, but it's not too late to choose what kind of family we want to be." He looked at me, the pain and hope mingling in his eyes. "I'm ready to try. I want to make things right." That moment was fragile and precious, a turning point in a story that had been filled with hurt. The road ahead was still uncertain. Paul's determination and Linda's presence loomed like storm clouds. But with Daniel beside me and the truth as my shield, I felt ready. I was no longer the powerless wife or the betrayed mother. I was a woman who had reclaimed her dignity and was prepared to fight for her life on her own terms. The family gathering was supposed to be a quiet, joyful occasion, a chance to reconnect, to heal old wounds, and to strengthen the fragile threads that bound us together. Invitations had gone out weeks earlier, close family and a few trusted friends. It was framed as a celebration of Daniel's recent promotion at work, a milestone for him, and a reason for all of us to come together under one roof. But beneath the surface, I knew it was a battleground. Paul had spent days preparing his speech, rehearsing the part he wanted to play: the loving husband, moving on the family man, welcoming a new chapter with Linda, his mistress, now openly invited to the event. His plan was to present a united front and silence any whispers of dissent. I, on the other hand, had been preparing a very different kind of statement. The evening arrived with an ominous stillness. The house was filled with familiar faces, aunts and uncles, cousins from out of state, and even some family friends I hadn't seen in years. The air was thick with polite smiles and forced pleasantries, but I could feel the undercurrent of tension. Everyone was waiting, some nervously, others with knowing glances. Linda moved through the crowd like a practiced socialite, radiant in a sleek dress, the picture of effortless charm. Paul was by her side, beaming with pride, as if to say, "See, this is our future." I stood quietly near the doorway, my heart pounding but my face calm and collected. Daniel was beside me, looking nervous but resolute, a sign that the tides might be turning. Paul began the evening with his toast. Standing tall, glass raised, he spoke in a smooth, measured tone. To family, he said, eyes briefly glancing at Linda. To new beginnings and embracing change. Life is unpredictable, but with love and unity we can overcome anything. The room responded with polite clinks of glasses and murmurs of agreement. But I could see some faces register discomfort, the subtle tightening of lips, the exchange of sideways glances. When the applause faded, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and clear. "Tonight should be about celebration, but I believe it's also about truth. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, sometimes it's painful, but it's necessary." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned toward me. I have been silent for a long time, too long, about things that affect not just me, but all of us. About decisions made in secret, betrayals kept behind closed doors, and a family fractured by lies. I saw Paul's expression harden. Linda's smile faltered. "I come here not to accuse, but to reveal, to bring to light what has been hidden." I placed the folder of documents on the table. These papers are proof, legal documents showing transfers of property and assets to Linda's name. These are signed by Paul and, shockingly, by Daniel. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the voice recorder. The unmistakable voices of Paul and Linda filled the room, plotting, scheming, discussing how to pressure me into donating a kidney, how to manipulate the family to secure her position. Faces went pale, some gasped, others looked away. I have been subjected to emotional blackmail, manipulation, and betrayal. My autonomy and health have been compromised by those I trusted most. Tears welled in my eyes, but I swallowed hard, refusing to break. Paul stood abruptly. "This is lies," he shouted, voice cracking. "She's trying to ruin our family with false accusations." Linda stepped forward, voice trembling. "I love Paul. I never intended harm. This is all a misunderstanding." But the room was no longer in their control. Daniel cleared his throat and stepped beside me. "Mom has shown me the truth. I was wrong to stand by and let this happen. It's time we all face it honestly." A stunned silence followed. For the first time, Daniel openly opposed his father and Linda. Relatives whispered, some shocked, others nodding in agreement. The foundation of Paul's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. I spoke again, my voice softer but filled with conviction. "This family can heal, but only if we face the truth together. Not by covering up lies, but by embracing honesty and accountability." Some family members approached, offering quiet support. Others avoided my gaze, uncertain or unwilling to confront the reality. Paul's face was pale, defeated. Linda looked like a woman exposed, her confident mask shattered. That night, after everyone had left, I sat with Daniel in the quiet house. The weight of what had been revealed hung heavy, but so did a flicker of hope. "We've taken the first step," I said. "But there's still much to rebuild." He nodded. "I want to help Mom. I want to make this right." I reached for his hand. "Together we will." The gathering was more than a confrontation, it was a reckoning. For the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of peace. The days after the family gathering unfolded like a slow-motion reckoning, a cascade of consequences that neither Paul nor Linda had anticipated. The carefully constructed illusion of harmony shattered, leaving behind fragments of truth that sparked a firestorm not only within our family, but beyond its walls. Linda's once unassailable image, the poised, charming woman who had effortlessly embedded herself in our lives, began to crumble piece by piece. At first, it was subtle, the avoidance of eye contact, the stiff smiles forced for the cameras of family events, the whispers trailing behind her when she passed through rooms. But as the evidence I had presented took root in the minds of those around us, her facade broke down further. She was no longer the confident interloper. She was the outsider exposed. Rumors, once hushed and speculative, gained momentum. Friends and acquaintances, previously silenced by Paul's carefully crafted narrative, now found courage to question, to confront. I received messages and calls from people I had not heard from in years, friends who had been fed half-truths or outright lies about me. They apologized for doubting my character, for believing the stories spun to isolate me. Their support was a balm to my battered spirit. But the social fallout was only the beginning. Legally, the situation escalated rapidly. The unauthorized sharing of my private medical records by Paul was not just a breach of trust. It was a violation of my privacy rights and hospital confidentiality laws. With the guidance of my lawyer, I filed formal complaints against the hospital and any medical professionals who had facilitated or ignored this breach. The investigation was thorough, uncovering troubling lapses in protocol and ethics within the clinic that had evaluated me without full informed consent. Doctors and administrators involved faced serious scrutiny. The hospital was forced to implement tighter policies on patient information, and the reputations of those implicated suffered accordingly. Meanwhile, the financial revelations unleashed a wave of inquiries. The property deeds and asset transfers to Linda's name, once hidden behind layers of paperwork and secrecy, became the focus of forensic accountants and legal experts. The documents were examined for validity, intent, and compliance with financial regulations. In several cases, it became clear that signatures had been obtained under dubious circumstances, with pressure and misinformation influencing decisions. Contracts were challenged, transactions halted, and a process began to reverse some of the unjust transfers. Paul found himself cornered, the man who had once ruled our family with quiet control, now facing not only emotional and familial estrangement, but looming legal consequences. His demeanor shifted from arrogance to defensive agitation as he navigated the growing legal and social backlash. His attempts to rally support among relatives faltered as evidence surfaced and whispers of betrayal grew louder. Daniel's role during this tumultuous time was both difficult and crucial. He had made the painful choice to break with his father and Linda, aligning with me in the pursuit of truth and justice. His testimony was a turning point. He spoke candidly to lawyers, recounting the pressure he had endured, the deception he had been a part of, and his regret. It was not easy for him. He faced anger and alienation from his father and others who sided with Paul. But his courage helped bring clarity and credibility to the legal proceedings. Through these trials, I found strength, not only in the justice slowly unfolding, but in the quiet moments of support and healing. Helen remained my steadfast ally, guiding me through the complexities of medical ethics and emotional resilience. The support group I had joined became a sanctuary, a place where stories like mine were shared and understood without judgment. In the quiet evenings at home, away from the storm, I allowed myself to breathe, to process, and to begin rebuilding the life that had been threatened. The house itself felt different now. Where once tension hung like a suffocating fog, there was a fragile peace. Paul withdrew into silence, his presence diminished as the consequences of his actions settled. Daniel and I worked slowly to mend the rift between us, acknowledging the pain, but focusing on the future. I spent more time in the garden tending to the plants and watching new growth, a metaphor for my own recovery. I reconnected with old friends and forged new bonds, discovering the power of community beyond blood ties. The road ahead remained uncertain. Legal battles still loomed and emotional wounds needed time to heal. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. I was no longer the victim of a cruel scheme. I was a survivor claiming her life back piece by piece. The fight had been arduous, the cost high, but the victory was profound. Not just in court or property, but in reclaiming my identity and dignity. The storm that had engulfed my life finally began to subside, leaving behind a landscape forever changed. The house felt quieter now, no longer a battleground for betrayal and manipulation, but a space where I could begin to breathe again, to reclaim the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. Sitting by the window in the soft afternoon light, I let myself reflect on the long, painful journey that had brought me here. For years, I had poured my energy, love, and sacrifice into this family. I had been the pillar, the quiet strength, the one who endured in silence while lifting others up. I had given up parts of myself for their dreams and happiness. Yet when it mattered most, those sacrifices were met with deceit and cruelty. The realization had been shattering. But so was my refusal to let that betrayal define me. In those dark months, I learned what it truly meant to fight for oneself. The kidney that Paul and Linda demanded I give was more than just an organ. It was the symbol of my autonomy, my body, my right to choose. When they tried to make me feel like I owed them this gift as if my love should come with strings attached, I understood that saying no was an act of survival, not selfishness. My resistance was not just physical, it was deeply psychological and emotional. I had to rebuild a sense of worth and identity that their manipulations had tried to erode. And slowly, piece by piece, I found that strength. Daniel's transformation was a balm to my wounded heart. He had walked a difficult path torn between loyalty to his father and love for me. His eventual choice to stand by my side was both painful and hopeful, a testament to the resilience of family when truth is embraced. Our conversations, once fraught with tension and mistrust, became moments of healing. We talked openly about the lies, the pain, and the hopes for rebuilding. It was not easy, and the scars remained, but the willingness to move forward was there. Paul's presence in my life diminished like a receding tide. The man who had wielded control with quiet dominance now faced legal and personal consequences for his actions. The family I once knew was irrevocably changed. Forgiveness was a concept I wrestled with, but did not rush to embrace. Boundaries were necessary, boundaries that protected my peace and my future. In the midst of this upheaval, I rediscovered parts of myself long neglected. I returned to the community clinic where I volunteered, finding purpose in helping others. The simple act of caring for patients reminded me of why I had chosen nursing decades ago, a profession rooted in compassion and resilience. I also reconnected with old friends and forged new bonds, building a support system that nurtured my healing. These relationships were a testament to the power of connection beyond family ties. The kidney donation, once a specter haunting every thought, became a symbol of triumph rather than threat. I reclaimed my body, my choices, and my voice. The right to say no was a hard-won victory, and I held it with fierce pride. Looking to the future, I know that healing is ongoing. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild. Wounds, though scarred, need care and patience to fade. Life's path is rarely straight or smooth, but I am walking mine with a renewed sense of hope and determination. To anyone who feels trapped by betrayal or silenced by those they love, know this: your voice matters. Your pain is real. Your strength is profound. And you have the right to stand for yourself, to reclaim your truth, and to build a future on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my story. If it has touched you, Please share your own experiences. Let us stand together in solidarity, healing, and courage. Remember to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of resilience and hope on Grace's Truth.